Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today, we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Welcome, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and we have our special guest, part two, with Eric, Rabbi Ephraim, and Denny joining us, and with an update. Last week, we talked about Gaza and the lies that are happening, which is causing a lot of problems, including, a firebombing at Eric's cousin's place that included his son. Had just got back from Israel, which is, amazing to us, and how shocking that is. And then Rabbi, this is kind of an important day for you, because you got to go, I know, in 30 minutes, but your son is going through bar mitzvahs today, so that's kind of cool. And
yeah, really exciting.
And we got to talk to him. He's a bright boy, so it's fun. Maybe we should have him on sometime.
That's a good idea. He'll be very happy to do that.
Yeah, he's bright. And now you're gonna have 100 people, and then he's got to get up and make a little speech, right?
That's right. Yeah, on the weekly Torah portion, and he's been studying up in order to be able to deliver that, and then he reads the Torah in a public ceremony on the Sabbath.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Do you, as parents, also stand up and give a little speech?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm on the line also.
Okay.
I'm a rabbi. I'm supposed to do that.
Congratulations. That'll be fun. We talked last time about these lies of Hamas, and then because of it, the Western press has picked it up and claimed it as true, but it's completely deceptive and false. But there's an impact, particularly in America, of a building anti-Semitism, and then we'll come back to what is Israel going to do in Gaza. But Denny, I know you had a couple questions about that and a thought about what you're observing. Why don't you state that, and then ask what you'd like to talk about in terms of this building anti-Semitism, which, by the way, is built on this false narrative.
It's funny how this has played out. So Trump and the MAGA movement have created a huge identity, and one of the real strengths that Trump has as a businessman is he can take a very complicated set of goals and turn them into a very unifying set of themes, which he did all through his campaign and all through his presidency so far. So that people who listen to Trump and understand him are not surprised by anything that his cabinet or he are doing, because they're completely consistent with the theme that was articulated. And again, because it was laid out so well in memorable terms of greatness. What has happened to the Democrats, the Democrat Party, and liberalism itself is, for reasons of losing and being surprised by losing this election, but much more because they can't seem to find an anchoring message. They have come to this place of saying, well, we're just against that. And so there is no thematic alternative. And what is emerging is sort of crazy, insane people as candidates for, in an off-cycle election this year in New York as mayor, and in one other city in the Northwest. And then the midterms is the idea that, kind of an anybody but MAGA, anything but MAGA. And what I see happening is that's running right in parallel to this growing anti-Semitism that we've been talking about for 6 months on the college campuses and now sort of in mainstream America. And, Eric shared, even a personal experience in our old town. But what some of us are very worried about is we're going to see sort of crazy elected officials from that side who may win elections on the basis of MAGA is a, quote, threat to democracy. It's unconstitutional. Everything associated with conservatism is an oligarchy in process, fascist Nazis. So this side has resorted to these new terminology of great fear, and mixed into it it feels like a tacit acceptance of anti-Israel hatred. And they'll deny it, even Jewish people who are on campuses holding up these cards, Jews for Hamas. Literally, those are the things we're seeing on our news. It feels to us like this is a movement that is completely in reaction, but it's a powerful movement. And so we know in the end times the whole world begins to sort of line up against Israel. And what I'm seeing happening is it's not just against Israel. It's against the support of Israel from the United States, Jews in Israel, or what they'll say is, no, it's about Zionism, in the United States. But as Ephraim was saying, I really see the point where I will be nervous about the fact that I look Jewish, if I carry any symbolism with me about being Jewish, that this will become a very dangerous thing to be walking down the streets of New York or Los Angeles, Chicago, major cities that are big hubs of Jews in the United States, because the Jews themselves in the United States are moving to the other side.
If I may comment, sorry. But the Jews are a vehicle here. The Jews, we're just the front end of anti-freedom, anti-democracy, and this is the way it's always been. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term the canary in the coal mine.
Yep.
An expression. The Jews are the canary in the coal mine. They would bring the canary into the coal mine because the canary would die because it would be sensitive to poison gases, and then the miners that were in the tunnels would realize that they're threatened, they would run out because the canary would be killed first. The Jews are the canary in the coal mine in every society. When a society starts turning evil, totalitarian, undemocratic, anti-freedom, then the Jews are always, throughout history, targeted first because somehow or other we represent those values. When people rise up, so it is definitely about the Jews, but we are just the start. And I'll give you an example. The Mamdani, who is running for mayor in New York, is representing the Democratic Socialists of America. So amongst their platform, which he's playing down these days, is not just, by the way, Denny, it's not subtle. Just for example, I saw recently a document. The Democratic Socialists of America said we will endorse AOC for her in her election bid if she agrees to our 4 conditions. 3 of the 4 conditions were radical anti-Israel conditions. Yeah. 3 out of the 4. That's what they were saying they care about. So this is not hidden that this is, and it includes no funding to Israel whatsoever from America, including for the Iron Dome that they insist upon. But it's not just that. The Democratic Socialists of America are also out for, I'm just looking here, extending voting rights to non-citizens, abolishing prisons, disarming the police, nationalizing businesses like railroads, utilities, and critical manufacture and technology companies. They are out to revolutionize America in ways that do not reflect Judeo-Christian values.
Yep.
And this is very attractive to young people who have been manufactured in our, higher education system.
And then you're saying reinforced by these lies that Israel's the ones that are causing suffering, and you should be against them.
Yeah, the anti-Semitism just makes it easy for people to jump on the bandwagon. We somehow make it more palatable for people, whether on the far left or the far right.
I was going to say one other thing in this and it's so funny because it gets turned around in a funny way. Trump was, in his first term, in between terms, when he was running again, was identified as an anti-Semite, endlessly anti-Semite. And of course, he has a daughter that is Jewish. He has a son-in-law that is Jewish. He has grandchildren that are Jewish. And now that has all stopped, right? Because this theme it's now no longer about Trump. It's really about these new, as you said, Ephraim, much more in your face, anti-Israel, anti-Jew, and, really anti-America, themes.
Do as you say this, and we see it, Eric and Ephraim, do you see the Jews themselves, particularly from Israel, do they recognize that it's going to get worse and worse and worse? And it's not just kind of happening periodically, it's now a strong movement against them. And do they understand that, one? And what do they see as where it's going to go?
So I'll comment, but I'm not going to comment on internal U.S. politics because just looking at it from abroad, it would appear, I think anybody looking at the situation, that the Democratic Party is undergoing a major either restructuring or breakup or very pointed differences in philosophy and direction that it's not clear how it's going to sort out yet. So that's all I think I'm going to say about U.S. politics. But in terms of the Jewish community, I think people here are getting worried. They're worried to a small extent about their own situation. A lot of, I just spent, I remarried my wife here in Israel. She's from the Pittsburgh community. She's American like myself. Her daughter just got married, and she and her husband are going off they planned a 3-week trip to Europe, and he's observing like Ephraim is, and he wears a kippah, a yarmulke on his head all the time. And I spent a lot of time telling him that he's going to either have to wear a baseball cap or nothing at all when he goes to Europe. And he's not convinced yet. And he doesn't speak much English. And I told him, whatever Hebrew you speak, you better speak it behind closed doors, because when they're spending time initially in Greece, a lot of Israelis vacation in Greece. Okay, a lot of Israelis used to vacation in Turkey, and that became off limits years ago because of the leader Erdogan and his government was so anti-Jewish. They're returning Israelis coming. There was just recently a cruise line. There's a local cruise with the operator here in Israel. It's nothing like the big things you see in the United States. And they take people to various islands in Greece and bring them back. And it's nice for Israelis because it's strictly kosher and so on. And Hebrew is the predominant language. They went to, I forget which island in Greece, and they were not allowed to disembark because there were protesters there, and the Greek government said that we can't ensure their safety. And there are just a lot of reports of Israelis traveling in Europe, coming back, and people are, reconsidering traveling to Europe and abroad. These problems so far haven't hit us in South America or in the Far East, which are also common destinations, particularly for discharged soldiers. But people are worried about traveling. Okay, you just heard Ephraim in his last episode talking about concerns about traveling in Canada. Canada has become like Europe, as far as we can tell. But that's Israelis concerned about traveling and safety abroad and things like that. I think there's a more fundamental concern that is just not being dealt with, in my opinion, in the diaspora Jewish community very well at all yet. And that's the recognition of what Dennis was talking about earlier. This problem is I described to you this firebombing of my cousin's home. His vehicle's outside his home, sorry. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. You talk to, Orthodox community in New York, they can't walk in the open anymore, without concerns about their safety. And especially in the parts of Brooklyn where there's a large ultra-Orthodox communities, these people are getting accosted physically. There were just, videos shown here in the Israeli press about people squirting water at them. Water is kind of harmless, but it's still indicative of the situation. I think we're just seeing the beginning. I think it's going to get a lot worse. You see it in Australia, in the Jewish community. What's going on in Australia is way off the charts. They're probably even a few years ahead of what's going on in Canada. I mean, these are places where Jews were very comfortable for many, many, many years. But I also want to report on one thing when Dennis was talking about MAGA. There are elements of the MAGA movement that are also becoming problematic for Jews. Okay, we're seeing reports of what Tucker Carlson's saying and doing on his air, and what Marjorie Taylor Greene. These things get reported here in Israel, and this is not very encouraging either. So, look, none of us expect.
What are those problems?
Well, from what I can read, it appears that there's an element of the MAGA movement, maybe the far right of it, I don't know, I can't really judge, that is extremely isolationist, that really believes the United States has no business, in any foreign involvement whatsoever anymore. And Israel represents an element of foreign involvement. And therefore, why are we spending time, energy, money dealing with these issues with Israel? I'm going to talk about that, but I'll go into it in a second. I think your listeners need to understand something about that issue. And so I don't think it's as large as the problem that's growing on the very far left that Dennis is talking about, but I think it exists also in elements of the far right. But let me now use it to segue into something that I think your listeners need to hear and understand. Being an American Israeli, it's my very strong opinion, that it's in the best interest of the world, of the free world, and of Israel that the United States remain the world power. And therefore, I kind of understand what the isolationists are saying. Look, we spend so much money on this crazy war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, I'm not sure I never I said to my friends that Iraq was a mistake from the beginning. I don't think we had a choice in Afghanistan, given what happened on 9/11. But that all these foreign wars are really draining the United States, and they're serving no one's purpose. And I understand that argument, and I'm not even going to contest it. Okay, the United States can't totally retreat into itself, thinking that it can ignore what's going on in the world. It doesn't work that way. The United States, in the aftermath of World War II, created probably the most benevolent period. If you call the United States an empire, which it's not, but if you just say it's a major world power, there's never been a time in the history of the world where a world power has been so benevolent and raised so many people around the world, not just the United States, around the world above the poverty line. That's happened because the United States is what it is, okay? And it modeled itself, believe it or not, after the ancient Israelites. If you read anything about the founding fathers, you'll know this, okay? It's the same values, the same infrastructure. And if the United States deserts that, it is not only hurting the world, it's going to hurt itself. The United States, in my opinion, and I think if you think about it, most people will agree, it should be dreaming of having more allies like Israel. Imagine for the moment if South Korea was strong enough and could take it on itself to deal with South Korea. And all it needed was the United States to send it F-35s. And it could deal with North Korea on its own. Just send them an F-35. Instead, the United States has, I don't know how many troops stationed in South Korea, a large number. I don't know how many troops they have stationed in Japan. It's a huge number, huge expense. Suppose instead you just simply sent them F-35s, which, by the way, in the case of Israel, many of which were getting paid for by the Israelis. But I will grant you that a lot of arms that are being provided at the tune of $3 billion a year, but all those arms are being bought from American companies. So if the United States had allies like Israel in the Far East, it wouldn't need to have all these soldiers. If it had an ally in Europe, that could stand up on its own and fight. Ukrainians they're doing whatever they can to defend their country against the onslaught of Russia. But you ask me about the French or the Germans or the Spanish. The Spanish and the Italians are doing whatever they can to avoid spending anything for a defense budget. It was only because President Trump in his first term went to Europe and said, we're leaving NATO unless you do something, that all of a sudden everyone started talking about increasing their defense budgets. Until then, they were all deceiving the United States. And the previous administrations prior to Trump couldn't care less. He's the one who forced them to increase their defense budget. And now all of a sudden they wake up, they realize, oh my God, Russia's on our border. I have a very dear friend here in Israel, Brother Skipper, who's from Belgium originally. He converted to Judaism while being here. And he's in the financial community. He was in various tech companies, but all in financial trade. He understands the financial markets quite well. And he's in touch with bankers all over the world. He was telling me that he was in touch with Swiss bankers who believe there's going to be a major war in Europe, not beyond Ukraine. The Swiss are preparing for the economic consequences of such a war. Did I talk too long?
Ephraim, before you go, any comments you want to make?
Yeah, just people in Israel are deeply disappointed in the world. Like basically, we have, it seems like, one ally in the world, and that's the United States, and that ally is being eroded, and we see what the reality is here, basic principles, that Israel was attacked by a vicious Islamic, barbaric, terrorist entity, which is out to destroy us. They're openly their goal, and they're on every on every one of our borders, and we're a tiny country, and they're out to destroy us. And we're trying to defend ourselves. And because they are so ruthless to hide themselves amongst their own civilian population that they could care less about, we are forced, even though we make tremendous efforts to try and prevent civilian casualties, but we're forced to defend ourselves against terrorists who have spent 20 years embedding themselves in very deep infrastructure. And their goal is to have as many civilians die or suffer as possible, because they know, and this is the unbelievable, they know the world will just ignore the fact that they started this war. The world will ignore the fact that they have embedded themselves amongst civilians and will go on the attack of Israel. Hamas knew that before October 7th. When they launched their war, they knew what Israel would do, and they knew they would get the backing of the world. It's just beyond belief. The facts are so simple and so obvious. I'll give you an example. There was just a massive report, I think it was the New York Times, on all the poor Hezbollah operatives that got killed by the Israel's beeper operation when several thousand Hezbollah terrorists were injured to varying degree, and then many of them killed, in Israel's very sophisticated op against them. In the entire operation, the entire article, huge article, Hezbollah is never referred to once as a terrorist organization. That every single one of these peoples were fighters for a terrorist organization, which by definition means they want to attack and destroy civilians. Not even mentioned that some people say they are a terrorist organization. So this type of propaganda which is being used to demonize Jews is just deeply disturbing. And Israel, which sort of, we care about world opinion because it's sort of, we're in a global economy in a global world, but it just seems like there's nothing we can do. And some people like to blame Bibi and Israel's policies. It's way beyond that. It has nothing to do with what Israel is or isn't doing. And so that it's just deeply, deeply disappointing. And as we see in the world, the hatred supposedly against Israel is just an excuse for anti-Semitism, because you just translate the word Zionist for Jew, and it's the exact same slogans: kill the IDF, kill the Zionists, destroy the Zionist entity. And then they're attacking Jewish people at a kosher restaurant in New York. What, did they check out whether they were Zionists, whether they were they fighting in Gaza? They're Jewish, right? It's just, they just know that it's palatable to use the word Zionist. And, to be anti-Jewish doesn't sound so great, but just say anti-Zionist and you can say whatever you want and persecute and humiliate and fight and be violent against any Jew you want. And it's considered not so bad because, you've got a justification. So anyway, we're disappointed and worried.
Ephraim, do you think this is a unique time in the history of the Jewish people where the Jewish people themselves are this divided over these issues? Because you would think that a conversation like this between Jews from around the world would have some commonality of understanding, and I don't think it would.
Yeah, and that's true. And I think that Israel is, I think the comments that I'm saying represent almost everybody in Israel. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're right. North American Jews, I think the more Jewish affiliated, the more Jewish connected people, most people would agree. But people that have very little connection, they're getting their same information about Israel from their college professors and the New York Times and CNN, and they're getting fed the exact same lies, and they believe them. And they're not going any further than your average non-Jewish person.
I agree, but I have one area where I differ, and that is, I think this is a very dynamic situation, and I think those dynamics are going to change. I think, as Ephraim says, this is not an anti-Israel situation. It's part of the problem. It's an anti-Jewish. It's just that now we have a state we can blame for all of our problems. Not in the time of the Nazis, it was a race. In the time of the early Christians in Europe, it was a religion. It's always something. Now it's because Jews have a state. And that state is the pariah of the world. All we have to do is get rid of it, and the world will be a great place. That's not the reality. And I think the Jews outside the United States, not in Israel, but in Europe and in Canada. I mean, Ephraim, you'll see when you go to Canada. I'm talking with people who just come from Canada. The Canadian Jews are telling their children, you cannot stay. You're going to have to go someplace else. The end of the Jewish community in Canada is near, and they're going to leave. Wow. Where they're going to go, I don't know yet, but they're going to leave. I was just 2 years ago, I was in LA speaking with a very out to dinner at a kosher restaurant with a very, very prominent member of the LA Jewish community. And as we're eating, there are people coming up, and it's like a scene from The Godfather. I haven't seen in a while. And 2/3 of them or not, I'm exaggerating, I'm sorry. About 1/3 of them are telling my friend as they're leaving, well, we just sold our house, we're on our way out. Yeah. And I turn to him, what's going on? He said the LA Jewish community, Federation, believes that over 10% of the families in the greater LA area are going to be leaving in the next 4 years. And it's happening because of California. California is one of the leaders in this crazy movement. I go back to California. Look, I spent most of my life in Palo Alto. It's a different place. It's not the Palo Alto I remember. It's not the California I remember. It's different. And Jews are going to figure, and the Jewish communities are going to figure this out, even if those are unaffiliated. Ephraim, it's going to go beyond the Orthodox community in the United States, because people are going to eventually realize it doesn't matter your affiliation, because these people don't care.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And
go ahead, Eric.
I just want to say one thing that I'm proud, that this is part of the prophecies also, that in the end, all the Jewish people are going to be back in Israel, and God has interesting ways of encouraging us to return. It happened with all those Jews in Russia. And the Jews in Ethiopia and Iraq and Iran, Jews, huge Jewish populations, hundreds of thousands of people, and God orchestrates interesting ways for Jews to come back to our homeland.
We're going to pick this up, and because we have so much to talk about, if you guys would look at your calendars for actually next Thursday, maybe picking more up, because we have so much more to discuss here about the two-state discussion in Gaza and this anti-Semitism, and what you just actually introduced is, and one thing we wanted to talk about was prophecy, and where do you see that going? We see certain things, and we'd like to know what you see and what the nation sees. So thank you so much for sharing the truth of this information, helping us understand it, from the depth of your understanding of truth. I pray that our audience will really seriously look at Eric's Substack, get really informed about this, because we have lots to talk about. And thank you so much. We're so honored that you take this time. And Rabbi, have a great evening with your boy.
Yes, mazel tov to him, right? So
very appropriate.
Thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, if you have questions, send them in to us at questions@abideministries.com. We'll see you next time.
Yep, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.